When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Hitler expected a quick victory. Instead, by December, his mechanized forces froze at the gates of Moscow. The Wehrmacht suddenly faced a brutal Soviet winter counteroffensive that pushed their lines backward. To compound the pressure, that same month, the United States entered the conflict, promising a massive influx of Allied industrial power. Fighting a multi-front, prolonged war required a colossal amount of raw materials. Prior to the invasion, Germany relied on the Soviets for these imports. Now they were burning through their finite stockpiles of the one resource dictating the survival of their mechanized army: oil. This map shows Germany's rapidly draining oil reserves, alongside the vast, untapped production capacity of the Southern Caucasus. Hitler realized that without securing these southern fields, his military would simply run out of fuel. Germany entered the 1942 summer campaign as a mandatory, high-stakes scramble for the resources required to keep the Wehrmacht moving. The plan to capture this oil was codenamed Operation Blau. German forces were ordered to break through Soviet lines in eastern Ukraine and race south toward the oil fields of Maikop and Grozny. The geographic strain becomes clear. The Eastern Front stretched roughly 2,500 kilometers long, pulling German lines dangerously thin. Zooming in, Army Group South could only pull together 72 divisions to cover this massive expanse. To concentrate enough armor to break the Soviet lines, German command had to leave thousands of miles of their flanks guarded by Allied armies from Romania, Italy, and Hungary. These Allied units lacked essential hardware like armor and high-velocity anti-tank weapons, such as the Flak 88 shown here, needed to stop a mechanized Soviet attack. Operation Blau was structurally compromised by overextension and undefended flanks before a single shot was fired. When Operation Blau launched in late June, the Red Army chose to retreat rapidly rather than hold their ground. This lack of resistance gave the German High Command a false sense of invulnerability. Believing the Soviets were already beaten, Hitler made a critical adjustment on July 23rd, altering the entire framework of the offensive. Instead of a single, concentrated push, Hitler ordered Army Group South to split. Army Group A continued south toward the oil fields. The 6th Army was sent east to capture Stalingrad, becoming entirely dependent on just 3 unconverted single-track railway lines. The supply chain choked immediately. Trains backed up, leaving troops short on ammunition and food. Fuel became so scarce that parts of this supposedly modern mechanized force were reduced to relying on horse-drawn wagons to drag their supplies. The 6th Army arrived at the gates of Stalingrad already crippled by hubris, starved of resources by a singular map-room decision. The assault on Stalingrad began from the air. The Luftwaffe heavily bombarded the city, collapsing blocks into a chaotic sea of shattered concrete. This massive aerial attack neutralized Germany's armor advantage. Panzers could not navigate the craters and debris. The environment forced the military into close-quarters urban combat, where Red Army infantry utilized the newly created rubble as highly effective defensive cover. Under the command of General Vasily Chuikov, the Soviet 62nd Army embraced the ruined landscape. They contested every basement, stairwell, and factory floor, dragging the Wehrmacht into what German troops called the War of the Moles. While the 6th Army bled through its finite stockpile of ammunition, the Red Army managed a perilous but continuous ferry system, moving fresh troops and hardware directly across the Volga River. Stalingrad transformed into a psychological trap. Hitler continued pouring his last capable units into a ruined footprint they lacked the manpower to secure. In November 1942, the Red Army capitalized on the vulnerabilities German command had engineered months earlier. They launched Operation Uranus. As this tactical map illustrates, over 1 million Soviet troops bypassed Stalingrad entirely. Massive pincer movements struck the thinly spread Allied armies guarding the northern and southern flanks. Within days, the 2 Soviet forces met at Kalach, locking 300,000 Axis soldiers inside an inescapable perimeter. Trapped in the pocket, the 6th Army deteriorated. Freezing temperatures plummeted. Soldiers quickly starved. A promised Luftwaffe airlift to drop hundreds of tons of daily supplies completely failed against poor weather and relentless Soviet anti-aircraft fire. By late January 1943, the situation was hopeless. Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal, a heavy-handed hint to commit suicide, as no German field marshal had ever surrendered. Paulus refused. The starved remnants of his force laid down their weapons and began a massive march into Soviet captivity. The graveyard of Stalingrad followed the predictable line of overextension that began in the summer and ended with the hollowed-out flanks of the winter.